A glance, a secret, a crime unravelled in an instant. Welcome to Cafe Echoes. I am your host, Silas Graves. Drop a comment. Where are you joining this mystery from today? Your thoughts make these tales come alive. Let's dive in. It was on a pallid February afternoon when London wore that particular expression of well-bred disapproval reserved for drizzle that I found Hercule Poirot in a state of grave agitation. Not the loud sort. Poirot never bellowed or raged like the heroes of penny dreadfuls, but the quiet, meticulous disturbance of a man who has discovered a speck of dust upon a newly polished surface. He stood in his sitting room in Whitehaven Mansions, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the mantelpiece as though it had personally offended him. His moustaches, those miraculous twin crescents, seemed sharper than usual, and as if they too had been affronted. "Mon ami Hastings," he said without turning, "you perceive something disorderly?" I looked where he looked. The mantel was immaculate. A clock, a small porcelain figurine, 2 candlesticks and a bowl of violets. Everything appeared aligned with a military precision that would have delighted a Prussian drill sergeant. "I can't say I do," I replied. Poirot sighed, the sigh of a man forced to educate the blind. "The violets. Yesterday they leaned, how you say, a little to the left," I corrected them. "Today they lean a little to the right. Not much, a mere suggestion, but it is enough." I was about to venture some remark about draughts or the settling of stems when the bell rang. Poirot glided to the door with the swiftness of a cat avoiding mud. Eamon returned, moments later, accompanied by Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard, his broad face damp with rain, his hat glistening, his expression wearing that mixture of impatience and reluctant respect I had come to associate with his visits. "Afternoon, Monsieur Poirot. Hastings?" Japp shook my hand and then, without preamble, turned to Poirot. "I've come because I'm up to the neck in a queer business, and it's got all the right people saying all the wrong things." Poirot's eyes brightened with interest. "A business queer, you say? And the right people, that is always delicious." Japp snorted. "Delicious for you, maybe. For me it's a headache. It's out in Surrey, Bramblehurst House, Sir Alistair Frobisher." At the name, I felt a faint stir of recognition. Sir Alistair Frobisher, baronet, financier, patron of the arts, and if society pages were to be believed, owner of one of the most enviable collections of antique cameos in England. "Murder?" I asked. "Not exactly," said Japp, and that very hesitation made me uneasy, though it might become that before I'm done. "Sir Alistair's been found dead in his library this morning. Locked room, no sign of forced entry, no weapon, and Hastings, his collection's gone." Poirot's head tilted. "Gone? All?" "Every last piece. 42 cameos, worth a small fortune, vanished as clean as if the air had swallowed them." Poirot's voice was mild, but there was a sharpness beneath it. "And Sir Alistair, how did he die if there is no weapon?" "That's the point," said Japp grimly. "Doctor says it looks like the heart, a seizure, but the timing's too neat. Found seated at his desk, pen in hand, like he'd just paused mid-sentence, except the letter he was writing, well, it's only 2 lines. Then nothing." Poirot's gaze fixed on Japp like a pin through fabric. "You brought with you this letter?" Japp produced an envelope from his coat. "Only because I know you. It was on the desk, sealed, addressed to a solicitor, Mr. Julian Mordaunt in Lincoln's Inn. No stamp, probably meant to be sent by hand." Poirot did not snatch it. He did not even reach for it at once. He merely looked at it, and I swear there was something almost theatrical in the way his eyes travelled from the flap to the inked name, from the thickness of the paper to the faint, dark smudge near the corner. And then, quite suddenly, he smiled. "Ah, said Poirot softly. "It is charming, Inspector. You have brought me the whole case." Japp blinked. "The whole—" "Don't be daft."
"Oh, Poirot, I haven't even told you who was in the house." Poirot held up a hand, polite as a maitre d' refusing an unsuitable guest. "Nevertheless, I have, with a single glance." I let out an involuntary laugh, half in disbelief, half in admiration. "Surely, Poirot, you can't mean—" "But I do mean," said Poirot serenely. "Observe, Hastings, the envelope, the seal, the direction. And this tiny thing like the violet that leans the wrong way. It is not the big facts that shout. It is the small facts that whisper." Japp's face reddened. "All right then, Professor. If you've solved it already, you can come and prove it, because I've got a house full of suspects and a dead man with no murderer." "A house full," murmured Poirot with relish. "Closed circle, yes. How I adore a closed circle."
One cannot run away from the truth when the doors are shut." He turned to me then, and the sparkle in his eyes was unmistakable. "Hastings, we go to Surrey. You will bring your boots, though do not trample the carpets, I beg you." Within 20 minutes we were in a taxi, heading through the wet streets toward Waterloo. Japp sat opposite, tapping his knee with impatience, while Poirot sat perfectly composed, the letter laid across his gloved palm like a sacred text. Outside, London blurred into grey. Inside Poirot's mind, those famous little grey cells, was already arranging the pieces of the puzzle into neat rows, and though I did not yet know it, the affair at Bramblehurst House had already begun, quietly, elegantly, and with a killer who believed, like so many before him, that one could deceive the world. But one cannot deceive Hercule Poirot. Not even for a moment. The train to Surrey was warm enough to fog the windows, and I watched the blurred hedgerows and chimneys slide past like smudged charcoal. Japp sat with his knees apart, hat tilted back, glancing at Poirot as though expecting him to conjure a culprit from the air. Poirot, for his part, regarded the sealed envelope as a connoisseur regards a rare truffle, without haste, yet with reverence. "You really mean to tell me," Japp broke out at last, "that from looking at that bit of paper you've got your man?" Poirot's smile did not change. "Not my man, Inspector. My mind. There is a difference. You see the corpse and you ask, who struck him? I see the living and I ask, who feared him?" "That's all very well," said Japp, but the lock was on the inside. The door was bolted. My but windows latched. If anyone got in or out, they did it like a blooming ghost. Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps, then, we must not search for feet upon the floor, but for hands upon the heart." I shifted, uneasy. A death that looked like the heart but smelled of design was precisely the sort of thing to make a man's skin crawl. "What did the doctor say exactly?" I asked. "Watkins, local chap. He says it could be natural. Sir Alistair had complaints now and then, but he also says the face, well, it weren't peaceful, not a man drifting off, more like he'd seen something he didn't like." Poirot murmured. "To see and not to like, yes, that is often fatal." We reached Bramblehurst shortly after 3. A motor awaited us, and within minutes we were swinging up a gravel drive between bare winter trees. Out the house appeared suddenly through the wet branches, an imposing Georgian pile, mellow brick, made dark by rain, the windows staring out with the blankness of eyes that had witnessed too much and would tell nothing. Inside, heat and polish and money met us at once. A maid in black led us through a hall where hunting prints and gilt mirrors competed for attention. The air smelled faintly of beeswax and lilies, an oddly cheerful scent for a house with death in it. In the drawing-room stood a group arranged in uneasy tableaux. Even before names were spoken, I felt the pressure of their presence, the hush, the false composure, the eyes sliding away too quickly. They were, as Jap had said, the right people. A tall woman in mourning crepe sat rigidly on a sofa, her hands clasped as though in prayer. Her face was handsome, but drawn, and her mouth had the firmness of a person used to deciding and being obeyed. Near the fire stood a young man with carefully careless hair, twisting a cigarette he did not light. Beside him, a pale girl in a wool dress stared at the carpet, blinking too often. An elderly gentleman, moustached and florid, hovered by a drinks trolley as if brandy were his last defence. Lastly, half in shadow near the window, a woman with dark eyes and a painter's scarf watched us with an expression I could only call amused contempt. Poirot paused on the threshold and performed, with exquisite delicacy, a small bow to the room at large. "Mesdames, Messieurs, permit that I present myself, Hercule Poirot, and my friend Captain Hastings." The tall woman rose at once. "Monsieur Poirot, I am Lady Frobisher." Her voice was low and controlled, but there was a fissure beneath it, as though grief had cracked something she did not wish seen. "Thank you for coming." Jap cleared his throat, businesslike. "Right. This is the lot that were in the house when it happened. Lady Frobisher, her stepson, Mr. Gerald Frobisher, Miss Daphne Frobisher, Sir Alistair's niece, Mr. Percival Larkin, Sir Alistair's secretary." He jerked his chin toward the florid elderly man, who nodded too vigorously. "Miss Celeste March, house guest." The woman by the window lifted one eyebrow as if the label amused her. "Artist," she corrected softly. "House guest artist, whatever you like," said Jap, already irritated. Poirot's gaze moved over them, gentle yet unsettling, like a hand smoothing a cloth to reveal hidden lumps. "You were all here," he said, "all within the walls."
That is, convenient." Lady Frobisher's mouth tightened. "Are we to be treated like criminals, monsieur?" Poirot spread his hands. "Not criminals, humans. Humans are much more interesting." Jap muttered, "Tell that to Scotland Yard," and strode off. "I'll show you the library, Poirot. It's been left as it was." As we followed him down a corridor panelled in oak, Poirot's attention seemed to take in everything: the symmetry of portraits, the placement of rugs, the faint scuffs on the runner. He noticed what I would have sworn was invisible, a tiny smear of mud at the edge of a skirting board, a vase slightly misaligned, the way one door along the passage stood a fraction ajar. "The house is very well kept," I observed, making conversation. "Yes," said Poirot. "Too well kept, in a house where people are afraid."
Or one is either careless or excessively careful. The library was at the rear, and as Jap opened the door, I felt an involuntary reluctance. The room was handsome, all leather-bound books and dark wood, warmed by a banked fire. At the centre stood a heavy desk. In the chair behind it sat Sir Alistair Frobisher. He had been left exactly as found, his head inclined slightly, as though listening. His right hand still held a fountain pen poised above paper. His face, however, was not the face of a man who had simply stopped. The mouth was half open, not in repose, but in surprise. The eyes were closed, yet the lids were tense, as if they had shut against something dreadful. On the desk lay the envelope Jap had brought to Poirot's flat, now placed beside the half-written letter. And the two lines were visible: "Julian, if anything should happen to me, you must—" And then an abrupt trail, as though the thought had been snatched away. Poirot did not approach at once. He stood very still, hands behind his back, his head slightly bowed, not in reverence to the dead, but in concentration. His gaze travelled, slow and exact, from the man's shoes to the desk blotter, from the fireplace to the bookshelves. He noticed a silver-framed photograph of Lady Frobisher. He noticed a decanter of water. He noticed, too, something that made his pupils contract almost imperceptibly. Japp watched him, hopeful and suspicious at once. "Well, any more single-glance miracles?" Poirot moved at last, stepping toward the desk with careful feet. He leaned over the blotter, not touching it, merely breathing near it as if scent were a clue. And then he straightened and looked at the door, the sturdy oak, the brass bolt on the inside. "It was bolted," said Japp. "That's the devil of it." Poirot nodded. "Yes, and yet—" He pointed, not dramatically, but with the neat precision of a man indicating a misplaced fork. "This bolt, Inspector, has been drawn back and pushed home more than once since it was polished." Japp frowned. "So, people use bolts." "Indeed." Poirot's voice remained mild. "But a man who sits alone, writing a letter, does not usually bolt himself in the middle of the day, unless he fears interruption, or unless he is instructed to do so." I felt a chill. Somewhere beyond the thick walls, the rain tapped at the glass like fingers. Poirot's eyes returned to Sir Alister's face. "He saw something," he murmured.
He did something that required no time, only one glance. And in that moment, standing between the warm fire and the cold stillness of death, I understood why Poirot had smiled at a mere envelope. This was not a crime of brute force. It was a crime of nerves, of timing, of someone who knew exactly where to press. Poirot lifted his head and spoke almost casually. "Inspector, before we speak again to your charming circle of suspects, I should like to see the place where the cameos were kept." Japp stared. "The strong room? It's empty, Poirot." Poirot's moustaches lifted faintly. "Empty rooms are sometimes the most talkative, mon ami." Japp led us from the library down a narrower passage at the back of the house, his boots thudding impatiently against the boards. A constable stood at attention outside a steel door set discreetly into the wall.
It as though guarding a bank vault rather than a private collection. "This is it," said Japp, producing a key. "Strong room was installed 5 years ago when Sir Alister bought that Roman Medusa piece, latest lock. Only 3 people had keys: Sir Alister, Larkin the secretary, and Lady Frobisher. We've checked. Their keys are all accounted for." Poirot inclined his head, but made no comment. The door swung inward with a muted heaviness, revealing a small, windowless chamber lined with fitted cabinets. Electric light glared upon glass-topped drawers, all standing open and empty. It was, as Japp had said, vacant. Yet the emptiness seemed theatrical, as though something had been arranged rather than removed. Poirot did not step over the threshold immediately. He remained at the entrance, surveying the room as a general might study a battlefield. His gaze drifted from the lock to the hinges, from the floor to the ceiling vent, from the cabinets to the solitary stool in the corner. "Nothing taken but the cameos?" he asked quietly. "Nothing else," Japp confirmed. "Cash in the desk upstairs untouched, silver in the dining room untouched. Whoever did this wanted those pieces and nothing more." "Ah." Poirot's eyes flickered. "A collector? Or someone who wished it to appear so?" Japp grunted. "You're the one who thinks it's all appearances." Poirot entered at last, his movements careful, almost reverent. He bent over one of the drawers, examining the velvet lining where 42 small masterpieces had once rested. There were faint impressions where each cameo had lain, ovals pressed into the pile like ghosts. He ran one gloved finger lightly along the edge of a drawer, then paused. "Hastings," he said softly, "do you observe?" I peered in. "It looks clean." "Precisely." Poirot straightened. "Too clean. The velvet bears the indentations of long habitation, yet there is very little dust disturbance around the edges. If a hurried thief had snatched them in agitation, one might expect irregularity. Japp frowned. You're saying they weren't grabbed in a rush? I am saying, replied Poirot gently, that they were removed with care. One by one, perhaps, with patience. He crossed to the stool and regarded it thoughtfully. And someone sat. Larkin sometimes catalogued them in here, said Japp. We've had that from him. Mais oui, and he did so recently. This week, he says. And Sir Alistair was considering an insurance reassessment. Poirot nodded, as though this fitted some private diagram in his mind. He examined the lock next, leaning close without touching. Then he stepped back and surveyed the room once more. Inspector, he said at length, tell me of the timeline. Japp folded his arms. Sir Alistair was seen alive at 11:30 this morning. That was by Larkin. Took him some correspondence. At 12:15, luncheon was announced. Sir Alistair didn't appear. Lady Frobisher sent the maid to fetch him. Door to the library was locked from the inside. They knocked. No answer. Larkin fetched a duplicate key for the outer lock, but the bolt was on. So they forced the door, found him as you saw. And the strong room? Checked straight away. Empty. Poirot was silent for a moment. So? Between 11:30 and 12:15, 45 minutes. In that time, Sir Alistair dies, the collection vanishes, and yet the house contains all your suspects. And no one saw a thing, said Japp grimly. Gerald claims he was out riding. Daphne says she was writing letters in her room. Lady Frobisher was with the housekeeper over accounts. Larkin was in his office down the corridor. Miss March says she was sketching in the garden, though the gardener swears he didn't see her. Poirot's brows lifted slightly. Already we have the little contradictions. He walked to the doorway and paused, looking back into the barren room. Inspector, was Sir Alistair in the habit of coming here daily? Nearly. He doted on the things. And yet today, before luncheon, he writes to his solicitor, if anything should happen to me. Poirot let the words trail delicately into the air. He anticipated danger. Japp shifted. Maybe he was ill. Old men get fancies. Old men who fear the heart do not usually write to their solicitors in half sentences, Poirot replied. We returned to the corridor. As we did so, the door of a small adjoining office stood open. Within, a large desk bore stacks of papers arranged with a precision that almost rivaled Poirot's own standards. That's Larkin's domain, said Japp. Poirot stepped inside without invitation. The air smelled faintly of ink and starch. He examined the blotter, the pen tray, the waste paper basket. He stooped and lifted a crumpled sheet from the bin, smoothing it delicately. Inspector, he said, or you have searched here? Of course. And found nothing of interest? Nothing beyond routine business? Poirot studied the crumpled sheet, then placed it carefully back where he had found it. His expression had altered very slightly. Not triumph, not even certainty, but interest sharpened. May I suggest, he said smoothly, that we now speak to Mr. Larkin? We found the secretary in the drawing-room, hovering at the edge of the group as though afraid to settle anywhere. He was a man of late middle age, with thinning hair and a complexion inclined to perspiration. His collar appeared one size too tight. Monsieur Poirot, he began nervously, I have told Inspector Japp everything. Then you will not mind telling it again, Poirot replied with gentle courtesy. Repetition is the test of truth. Larkin swallowed.
Oh, I saw Sir Alistair at 11:30. He seemed preoccupied. He dismissed me rather abruptly. Preoccupied? Poirot's tone was mild. Yes, He had received a letter earlier. It unsettled him. A letter, murmured Poirot. From whom? I do not know. It was private. Yet you noticed its effect. Larkin hesitated. Sir Alister was not a man easily shaken, but his hand trembled. Ah! Poirot's eyes gleamed. The hand. And you left him alone? Yes. Did you observe whether he bolted the door? No, I did not. Poirot nodded slowly, as though this omission were a bead added to a string. And the strong-room key? Where was yours this morning? In my pocket, as always. May I see it? With trembling fingers, Larkin produced a small brass key. Poirot took it, weighing it lightly in his palm before returning it. Merci.
You have been most helpful. As Larkin retreated, dabbing at his brow, I leaned toward Poirot. You suspect him? Poirot's gaze drifted across the room, resting briefly on each face in turn. Lady Frobisher's contained grief, Gerald's restless irritation, Daphne's pale composure, Miss March's watchful eyes. I suspect, he said softly, that someone in this house knew exactly what Sir Alister would see at a single glance, and that it would be enough. He adjusted his cuffs with fastidious care. And now, Hastings, we begin the true game. Poirot did not at once single out his next interlocutor. Instead, he requested that tea be served. The simple domesticity of the order caused a visible ripple through the room. Grief, suspicion, outrage, these emotions may flourish in silence, but they are disconcerted by cups and saucers. And when the tray arrived, borne by a maid whose hands trembled only slightly, Poirot supervised the arrangement with a fastidious eye. He shifted the sugar bowl half an inch, aligned the spoons, and selected a chair from which he could observe the entire assembly without turning his head. "Now," he said pleasantly, stirring his tea with delicate precision, "we shall converse." His gaze settled first upon Gerald Frobisher. The young man met it with a mixture of defiance and impatience. "You were riding this morning, I think?" Poirot inquired. "Yes, the mare needs exercise." "At what hour did you leave the house?" "Shortly after 11. "And you returned?" "Just before 1. I heard the commotion." "Did anyone see you depart?" Gerald hesitated. "The groom." "And upon your return?" "The same." Poirot nodded. "You are fond of the cameos?"
Perhaps." Gerald gave a short laugh. Fond? They were my stepfather's obsession. I never saw the attraction, bits of carved stone behind glass. "Yet valuable bits," Poirot observed gently. Gerald's jaw tightened. "If you're implying I needed money—" "I imply nothing," said Poirot smoothly. "I collect impressions, that is all." His attention shifted to Miss Daphne Frobisher. She sat upright, her hands folded too neatly in her lap. "You were writing letters, mademoiselle?" "Yes." "To whom?" "To a friend in Bath." "May we see the letter?" A faint flush rose in her cheeks. "It is personal." "Assuredly. Yet the time, did you note it? I began at 11 and wrote for perhaps an hour." "Without interruption?" "Yes." Poirot inclined his head, as though satisfied for the moment. "And you did not hear anything unusual? A raised voice? A fall?" "No." He sipped his tea, then turned to Lady Frobisher. "Madame, you were occupied with household accounts?" "Yes." "With Mrs. Grant, the housekeeper?" "And your husband appeared anxious this morning?" Her composure faltered almost imperceptibly. He had been anxious for days. Because of his health? Because of matters of business? Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Ah, matters of business? You knew he was writing to his solicitor?" She stiffened. "No. Yet you say he was anxious for days." "He told me little," she replied coolly. "We were not in the habit of sharing every concern." The faintest tremor ran through the air at that admission. Poirot acknowledged it, with a slight bow. Finally, he turned to Miss Celeste March, who had thus far observed with an air of detached curiosity.
You were sketching in the garden? Yes. In the rain? It had not begun then, she said calmly, and I prefer winter light. The gardener did not see you. He is old and nearsighted. A corner of Poirot's mouth lifted. You are an artist. You observe closely. I try. Then tell me, mademoiselle, did you observe anything of interest this morning? A figure at a window, a movement behind a curtain? Her dark eyes flickered, not with surprise but calculation. No, she said at last. Nothing that struck me. Poirot set down his cup. Nothing that struck you, he repeated softly. Inspector Japp shifted, clearly impatient with what must have seemed to him an exercise in polite trivialities. All very charming, he muttered, but we've got a dead man and 42 missing heirlooms. And we shall have them, Poirot replied mildly. In due course. He rose and paced slowly before the fireplace. Consider, my friends, Sir Alistair feared something. He wrote to his solicitor in anticipation of danger. He bolts his door. He dies without a mark upon him. Meanwhile, his precious collection vanishes, carefully, methodically. Gerald made an exasperated sound. Are you suggesting my stepfather frightened himself to death over his own trinkets? I suggest, said Poirot, turning sharply, that he saw something that confirmed his fear, something arranged for him to see. A silence followed this, deeper than before. Arranged? Echoed Daphne faintly. Yes. A glance can kill if what it reveals is sufficiently terrible. Japp crossed his arms. You're talking riddles again. Poirot smiled faintly. Not riddles. Psychology. He moved toward the window and examined the glass.
Inspector, the garden beneath this window, does it show any footprints? Ground's too firm near the house, and the rain later washed most of what there was. Just so. Poirot turned back to the group. Tell me, did Sir Alistair ever receive threats? There was a fractional pause, so slight it might have been missed, but Poirot did not miss it. Lady Frobisher spoke. He had disagreements. What wealthy man does not? With anyone in this room? Poirot asked gently. Gerald's face flushed. This is absurd. Absurdity, murmured Poirot, is often the mask of truth. He approached the mantelpiece and adjusted a small porcelain figurine that had been set slightly askew. The movement seemed trivial, yet I knew better. When Poirot imposed order upon objects, it was because disorder troubled his mind. At length he addressed Japp. Inspector?
I should like the servants assembled as well, and I should wish to verify the times independently. Japp sighed, but nodded. Right. As the others dispersed reluctantly, Miss March lingered by the door. For an instant, her gaze met Poirot's. There was something almost challenging in it. You believe one of us killed him? She said quietly. Poirot inclined his head. I believe one of you wished him to die. And the cameos? They are important, said Poirot, but not in the way you think. When she had gone, I turned to him. You've unsettled them, I said. Bien sûr, a pond must be stirred if one wishes the mud to rise. Do you know who did it? He regarded the empty doorway thoughtfully. I know this. The cameos were removed before Sir Alistair died. I stared. But he did not discover their absence by chance, Poirot continued. He was meant to discover it, and what he saw, what he understood in that instant, was enough to stop his heart. A chill crept over me. Then the theft was not the crime, I said slowly. Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. No, Hastings, it was the weapon. The weapon? I repeated, scarcely above a whisper. Poirot nodded, his expression grave but animated by that inward fire, which always meant his thoughts were arranging themselves into some elegant pattern invisible to the rest of us. Yes, Hastings, consider, if a man's heart is weak, and he is made to believe that he has been ruined, betrayed, disgraced, what then? The body obeys the mind. Inspector Japp rubbed his jaw. You're saying someone pinched the cameos knowing the shock would finish him? I say, replied Poirot carefully, and that someone removed them so that Sir Alistair would see their absence. The question is, how was he induced to look? We returned to the library. The constable stepped aside. The late afternoon light had shifted. The room felt colder, more severe. Sir Alistair remained as before, a silent witness to his own end. Poirot approached the desk once more. "The letter," he murmured. "If anything should happen to me, you must—" What must he do? Protect the collection? Amend the will? Expose a fraud? Japp shifted impatiently. Or maybe it's nothing so dramatic. Poirot bent slightly and examined the desk surface inch by inch. His gaze paused at the blotter, then moved to a small object near the inkwell, a paper knife of carved ivory. "Hastings," he said quietly, "what do you see here?" "A paper knife." "Just so. And yet it lies not as it would if set down carelessly." He adjusted it a fraction, then restored it. "Observe the indentation on the blotter. It has been lifted and replaced." Japp frowned. "Lots of things get moved." "Indeed. But let us suppose that Sir Alistair received a letter this morning. He opens it, perhaps with this knife. He reads. His hand trembles. Larkin observes this. Then later he writes to his solicitor." "You think the morning letter's important?" Japp asked. "I am certain of it." Japp grimaced. "We haven't found any such letter." Poirot straightened slowly. "Then it has been removed." The implication hung between us. "By the killer?" I ventured. "By the person who feared what it contained?" Japp let out a breath. "All right, we'll search again." "Search," said Poirot gently, "but not only for paper."
"Yeah, search for motive." He walked to the bookshelves and studied the spines with apparent casualness. Then unexpectedly he pulled out a volume and glanced behind it. Nothing. He replaced it with care. Hastings, imagine the scene. Sir Alistair, already anxious, receives a letter, perhaps accusing, perhaps threatening. He dismisses his secretary. He locks his door. Why? "To be alone," I said. "Or to protect something," Poirot replied. He writes to his solicitor. Then what? Does he rise and go to the strong room, or does someone come to him? Japp shook his head. Door was bolted. Ah, yes, the bolt. Poirot moved to the door and examined it again. He traced the metal lightly with his finger. "You say it was forced?" "With a shoulder. Splintered the frame a bit." "Before it was forced," Poirot continued softly.
Did anyone test the handle?" "Of course, it wouldn't turn." "And the bolt, was it firmly set?" "Right across." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Then no one entered after it was bolted." "That's what I've been saying." "But," Poirot went on, "it does not exclude that someone was already within." I stared at him. "You mean hidden?" "Perhaps," Japp scoffed. "There's nowhere to hide." "Is that so?" Poirot's tone was mild. "The curtains are heavy, the cupboards deep, the fireplace wide enough to conceal a small man." "Don't be ridiculous," said Japp, though without much conviction. Poirot's gaze returned to Sir Alistair's face. "He looks not merely shocked," he murmured. "He looks betrayed." A knock at the door interrupted us. It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Grant, pale and tight-lipped. "Inspector," she said, "you asked for the servants." "Yes. Keep them in the morning room." As she turned to go, Poirot addressed her gently. "Madame, this morning, did Sir Alistair receive any unusual correspondence?" She hesitated. There was one letter not in the usual hand. "From whom?" "I do not know. It bore no crest." "And after he read it?" "He rang for Mr. Larkin almost at once." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci." When she had gone, he looked at Japp. "You see? The sequence tightens." Japp crossed his arms. Suppose this mystery letter frightened him? That still doesn't explain the cameos walking out by themselves. "No," Poirot agreed. "But it suggests that the theft and the letter are connected." He moved to the desk again and picked up the envelope addressed to the solicitor. "Inspector, has the handwriting been examined?" "Preliminarily." "Ah, it's his." "And the ink?" "Matches the pen on the desk." Poirot smiled faintly. "Then he wrote it willingly, not under duress." "Meaning?" "Meaning that whatever he saw occurred after he began the letter." Japp blinked. "After?" "Yes. He writes, 'If anything should happen to me.' He anticipates danger, but has not yet experienced the decisive shock. Then something happens. He sees. He understands. His heart fails." A silence fell. "You think," I said slowly, "that someone showed him the empty strong room?" Poirot shook his head. No, he would not leave his desk in the middle of such a letter unless compelled. The revelation came to him. "How?" Japp demanded. Poirot did not answer at once. He walked to the fireplace and crouched slightly, peering into the grate. Then he rose, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve.
Hastings," he said quietly. "We must speak again with Mr. Larkin, alone." "Larkin?" Japp frowned. "You've already had a go at him." "Precisely." And he perspired. As we left the library, I glanced back at the still figure in the chair. The room seemed to watch us go. In the corridor, Poirot paused and lowered his voice. "There is something in that office of his, Hastings. Something discarded too carelessly." "You mean the crumpled paper?" Poirot's eyes shone. "Just so, and I suspect that within it lies the first true crack in this polished facade." He straightened, smoothing his tie with habitual precision. "Come," he said softly. "Let us see how a careful man explains an incautious act." We found Mr. Larkin in his office, standing rigidly behind his desk as though it were a barricade.
And the neat stacks of correspondence before him had not shifted by so much as a fraction since our earlier visit. Yet the man himself had altered. The careful civility he had worn before was fraying at the edges. "Monsieur Poirot," he began, forcing a smile, "have you discovered anything further?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied pleasantly. "May we?" He entered without waiting for permission, and took the chair opposite the desk. I remained near the door, conscious of the narrowing air between the two men. "You have served Sir Alistair long, I think?" Poirot asked. "Nearly 12 years. A relationship of trust." "Of course. And this morning you observed his agitation upon reading a letter?" "Yes." "You did not see the contents?" "No." "But you deduced it was troubling." "He was pale, his hand shook." Poirot inclined his head, and afterward,
"He dismissed you?" "Immediately." "You returned to your office?" "Yes." "And remained there until the alarm?" "Yes." Poirot leaned back slightly. "Alone?" Larkin's lips tightened. "Yes." There was a pause, not accusatory, but patient. Poirot's eyes drifted to the wastepaper basket beside the desk. "Inspector Japp has, of course, searched your office," Poirot continued lightly. "He is thorough." "I have nothing to conceal," Larkin said quickly. "No, no. Only perhaps a draft discarded too hastily." Larkin stiffened. "I do not understand." Poirot bent, and with the same delicate gesture as before, retrieved the crumpled sheet from the basket. He smoothed it upon the desk, his fingers careful not to crease it further. "I fear you understand very well," he said softly. The page bore only a few lines.
I hastily written and then violently scored through. Even from where I stood, I could read fragments. Insurance valuation, immediate revision. In light of recent irregularities, Poirot tapped the paper gently. This was written today. Yes, Larkin admitted, his voice thin. I began a memorandum to the insurers. Sir Alistair had mentioned reassessing the collection. And you discarded it? I realized it was premature. Premature, Poirot repeated thoughtfully. Because he had not yet confirmed the changes. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Or because you discovered something? Larkin's composure wavered. Discovered? What could I possibly discover? Poirot leaned forward slightly. That the collection was no longer intact. The silence that followed was profound. Larkin's face drained of colour.
That is absurd. Is it? Poirot's tone remained mild. You had a key to the strong room. You catalogued the pieces. If one or more had been removed prior to today, you would notice. I tell you I noticed nothing. And yet you began to write of irregularities. Larkin's hand twitched toward the paper, then withdrew. It was a figure of speech. Ah, Poirot sat back. Then perhaps you will explain another small matter. He rose and moved to the desk, examining the inkstand. This blotter, most orderly. Yet here, beneath the upper sheet? He lifted it delicately. There is an impression. Japp, who had entered quietly and now stood near the door, leaned forward. What impression? Poirot angled the blotter toward the light. Faintly but unmistakably were the indented letters of a phrase written with pressure upon a previous page.
Told the Medusa is not what it seems, Poirot read softly. Larkin made a strangled sound. That means nothing. On the contrary, said Poirot gently. The Roman Medusa cameo was the pride of the collection. If it were not what it seemed— You cannot prove that was written today, Larkin interrupted. Poirot's eyes flickered. No, but I think it was. He replaced the blotter carefully. Tell me, Mr. Larkin, when did you last examine the Medusa piece? 2 days ago. And it was genuine? Of course. And today? I did not enter the strong room today. But Sir Alistair may have, Poirot said quietly, after receiving the mysterious letter. Suppose that letter suggested a deception, that one of his treasures was false. Suppose he went to verify it. Japp's brows knitted. You think someone swapped a cameo? Or implied it had been swapped, Poirot replied. Imagine the shock to a man whose reputation rested upon discernment. Larkin gripped the edge of the desk. This is conjecture. Certainly, Poirot agreed. But it fits the psychology. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You knew Sir Alistair's heart was weak? Yes. And you knew his pride was strong? Larkin said nothing. Poirot's gaze held him. If he believed he had been deceived publicly or privately, would that not strike at him more surely than any blade? You are twisting. No. Poirot straightened. I am arranging. Japp cleared his throat. All right, Poirot, let's say the letter accused him of owning a fake. That still doesn't explain how the rest of the collection vanished. Poirot turned toward him. If the Medusa were false—
What then are the others? Doubt spreads. A collector in panic might order an immediate inspection, or he might confide in someone. And someone used that, Japp finished slowly. Precisely. Poirot faced Larkin once more. You wrote of irregularities before the body was found. That suggests knowledge. I feared there might be discrepancies in the inventory, Larkin stammered. Because Sir Alistair had been secretive. Secretive? Poirot's interest sharpened. Yes, he had received visitors regarding the collection, private viewings. Who? Japp demanded. Larkin hesitated. Dealers, experts. Names, said Japp. As Larkin recited them, I saw Poirot's expression grow thoughtful, not triumphant. The net was tightening, yet he seemed less concerned with the fish than with the pattern of the mesh.
When at last we left the office, Japp exhaled sharply. He's hiding something. Undoubtedly, Poirot agreed. You think he sent the letter? Poirot shook his head. No, the letter was designed to be believed. And the cameos? Removed to create certainty. Japp frowned. Certainty of what? Poirot paused in the corridor, his eyes distant. That Sir Alistair's greatest fear was justified. I felt again that chill along my spine, and that fear killed him. Yes, said Poirot softly, but fear alone is not enough. Someone guided it. He glanced back toward Larkin's closed door. And we are very close, he murmured, to discovering who held the lantern. Poirot did not immediately seek another interview. Instead, he asked that we be shown once more to the library, and that no one enter until he gave permission. Japp, big though visibly restless, complied. There was something in Poirot's manner, quiet, inexorable, that discouraged interruption. The room had grown dimmer, dusk pressed faintly against the windows. A constable lit the lamps and withdrew. The warm glow softened the harsh outlines of the scene, yet it did nothing to diminish the stillness of the figure behind the desk. Poirot stood very straight in the centre of the carpet, turning slowly upon his heel as though aligning invisible threads. I knew better than to speak. At length he approached the desk and, with a glance toward Japp, lifted the blotter entirely. Beneath it lay a sheet of thin paper used to protect the surface. Poirot removed it delicately and held it to the light. "Observe," he murmured. The indentation we had glimpsed before was clearer now, faint but legible in places. Japp leaned close. "Medusa, authenticity, questioned." Japp read haltingly. "And here," Poirot added, shifting the angle, "unless immediate action, public embarrassment." Japp swore softly. "So someone told him the Medusa was a fake, or threatened to say so," Poirot replied. He laid the sheet aside and examined the half-written letter once more. "If anything should happen to me, you must—" His finger hovered above the unfinished line. He was about to give instructions. To whom? To the solicitor? Why? "Because he thought he was in danger," I suggested. "Danger of exposure," said Poirot quietly. He moved to the fireplace again and crouched, peering into the grate. This time he reached inside with careful fingers and drew out a fragment of charred paper, blackened at the edges, but not wholly consumed. Japp stared. We searched that grate." "Not sufficiently," Poirot said mildly. He carried the fragment to the desk and laid it flat. Under the lamplight, faint lettering could be discerned. "Examination by independent expert," I read, my voice low. "And here," Poirot added, "a signature, only the first letter remains, perhaps an M." Japp's brow furrowed. "One of the dealers Larkin mentioned?" "Possibly." Poirot straightened. "Now, consider the sequence. Sir Alistair receives a letter questioning the authenticity of his prized cameo. He is shaken. He summons Larkin. Later, alone, he writes to his solicitor. At some point he verifies the accusation, or believes he does. "By checking the strong room," Japp said. "Exactly." "And finds it empty," I finished. "Or finds the Medusa missing," Poirot corrected gently. "Or the rest may have been removed earlier or later. The essential thing was that he saw enough to confirm his worst fear." Japp's eyes widened slightly. You think only one piece was gone at first? It is probable, Poirot replied. To remove all 42 at once requires time, but to remove one, the most valuable, would suffice to provoke alarm. And then? Then, Poirot continued, while Sir Alistair sat at his desk grappling with humiliation and dread, the remainder of the collection could be taken. Japp let out a slow breath. But by whom? Everyone says they were elsewhere. Everyone says, Poirot echoed softly. He walked to the window and parted the heavy curtains. Outside, the garden lay in shadow, the gravel path faintly silver in the fading light. Hastings, he said, when a man fears disgrace, he is less concerned with thieves than with witnesses. If Sir Alistair discovered the Medusa missing, what would he do? Confront someone, I replied. Whom? The person he suspected. Precisely. Poirot turned back toward the desk. He bolts the door, not to exclude a murderer, but to ensure privacy. Japp's eyes sharpened. So he expected someone to come? Yes. And that someone came before the door was forced? Indeed. A silence fell as the implication settled. You're saying, Japp said slowly, that whoever he confronted was in this room with him. For a time, Poirot agreed, and left before the alarm. Without unlocking the door from the outside, Poirot added, because it was bolted within. Japp swore under his breath. That's impossible. Is it? Poirot's tone was gentle but relentless. The bolt could be manipulated from outside with a device, a cord, a wire. Japp frowned. We saw nothing of the sort. Poirot moved to the door and examined the keyhole. He bent slightly, then straightened. There are faint scratches here, he said. Very faint. Japp leaned close. I don't see. You would not, Poirot said kindly. They are recent. I felt a stir of excitement. So the door was bolted after the visitor left. Yes, Poirot replied, to create the illusion of solitude. And the strong room? Japp pressed. If only one cameo was removed earlier, Poirot said thoughtfully. The rest could have been taken while Sir Alistair lay dead, or dying. Japp's jaw tightened, meaning the theft wasn't complete until after his heart gave out. Quite. A faint sound in the corridor caused us to turn. Fitzgerald Frobisher stood just beyond the threshold, pale and tense. I demand to know what is being suggested, he said sharply. Poirot regarded him calmly. We are suggesting nothing, monsieur. We are observing. My stepfather is dead, Gerald snapped, and you speak of wires and scratches as though it were a puzzle. It is a puzzle, Poirot replied softly, and your stepfather deserves its solution. Gerald's gaze flicked to the desk, then to the fireplace. For an instant, only an instant, something like fear crossed his face. Poirot saw it. You were fond of riding this morning, he said gently. Yes. In the rain? It was not raining then. And you returned before 1? Yes. Poirot nodded slowly. Tell me, did you visit the library upon your return? Gerald hesitated. No. Not even to see if Sir Alistair would join luncheon? No. The denial came too swiftly. Poirot inclined his head, as though the answer satisfied him entirely. Merci, he said. When Gerald had gone, Japp exhaled. You think it's him? I think, said Poirot quietly, that he fears something more than accusation. He moved once more to the desk and regarded the unfinished letter. Hastings, he murmured, we are very near the truth. The missing cameo, the forged bolt, the burnt letter all point to design. And the rest of the collection? I asked. Poirot's eyes gleamed. They will lead us, he said softly, to the hand that struck without touching. Poirot remained very still after Gerald's departure, his gaze resting upon the closed door, as though he could see through it. Japp shifted from foot to foot, in impatience warring with reluctant admiration. "Well?" the inspector demanded at last. "Are we arresting the stepson or not?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked back to the desk and carefully rearranged the objects upon it, the pen aligned with the edge of the blotter, the paper knife placed precisely parallel. Only when the symmetry pleased him did he speak. "Not yet, Inspector. There is one more element that troubles me." "Another element?" Japp groaned. "We've got a fake cameo, a threatening letter, a bolted door, and a family at each other's throats. What's missing?" "The motive that explains all," Poirot replied softly. He turned to me. "Hastings, when Sir Alistair discovered the Medusa missing or believed it false, what was at stake? His reputation," I said, "his pride, and perhaps his fortune," Poirot added. If the collection were compromised, insurance would be affected. Investors might lose confidence." Japp's brows knit. "You think he'd insured them for more than they were worth?" "I think," said Poirot, "that he had reason to fear exposure." A knock interrupted us. Miss Celeste March entered without waiting for invitation. In the lamplight, her dark eyes seemed almost luminous. "You are making progress," she said quietly. Poirot inclined his head. "We advance." She glanced at the desk, at the fragment of charred paper. "And have you determined whether Sir Alistair was deceived or deceiving?" Japp stared. "What's that supposed to mean?" Miss March did not look at him. Sir Alistair enjoyed admiration. He enjoyed being thought infallible. Poirot's eyes sharpened. You suggest the Medusa may indeed have been false." "I suggest nothing," she replied evenly, "only that collectors sometimes value prestige above truth." Poirot studied her with renewed interest. "You are perceptive, mademoiselle." "I am observant." "Then tell me, this morning, did you see Mr. Gerald Frobisher in the garden?" A faint pause. "No." "Did you see anyone?" She hesitated. "I saw Mr. Larkin at one of the rear windows. He appeared agitated." Japp turned sharply. "When?" "Shortly before noon." "And you said nothing?" "I was not aware it mattered." Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. "You prefer to watch rather than intervene." "It is safer," she said softly. When she had withdrawn, Japp let out a low whistle. "Larkin at the window?" "Yes," Poirot murmured. "And Gerald returning from his ride." "You think they were working together?" Poirot shook his head. "Not together. Their anxieties differ." He crossed to the window and examined the latch carefully. "Inspector, was this window tested?" "Of course. Fastened." "From within?" "Yes." Poirot nodded. "Then whoever left this room did so before the bolt was drawn." Japp frowned. "You're back to that?" "Always," Poirot said gently. "The bolt is central." He stepped to the door and demonstrated with his hands. "If a cord were attached here, passed through the keyhole, one could close the bolt from outside." "Provided one had time," Japp muttered. "Time was available," Poirot replied. "In the confusion before luncheon." I felt a tightening in my chest. "So Sir Alistair confronts someone. There is an argument. He sees proof, the missing cameo. His heart fails. The visitor leaves, manipulates the bolt, and later removes the remaining pieces." "Exactly," Poirot said. "But why take the rest?" Japp pressed. "If the shock was enough, why risk more?" Poirot's gaze returned to the charred fragment on the desk. "Because the first removal was symbolic, the second was practical." "Practical how?" "To ensure that when the strong room was opened, the narrative would be clear. Theft, not fraud." Japp blinked. You think the Medusa wasn't stolen, it was fake all along. I think, Poirot said carefully, that Sir Alistair had reason to suspect it. And someone exploited that suspicion, I said. Yes. A sudden sound echoed from the corridor, a raised voice, then another. Japp strode to the door and opened it. Daphne stood there, pale and trembling, clutching a small object in her hand. I found this, she said faintly. She extended her palm. Upon it lay a cameo, small, oval, exquisitely carved. The Medusa? Japp demanded. Daphne shook her head. No, it was under the cushion in the morning room. Poirot stepped forward and took the piece delicately. He examined it under the lamplight, his eyes narrowing. One of the lesser pieces, he murmured, deliberately hidden. Japp's face darkened. Someone panicked. Or someone planted, Poirot corrected. Daphne's voice quavered. Does this mean the others are still in the house? Very likely, Poirot said softly. A hush fell over the corridor as the implications spread. Japp straightened. Right, we search every room. Poirot raised a hand. Gently, Inspector. A frantic search may destroy more than it reveals. He turned the cameo in his fingers, studying its edge.
Notice this. No dust within the grooves. It was not long concealed. You think it was hidden after the death? I asked. Yes. And by whom? Poirot's gaze lifted slowly to Daphne's face, then past her down the corridor. By someone who wished to suggest confusion, he said quietly. To make the crime appear impulsive rather than planned. Japp exhaled sharply. This is turning into a circus. No, Poirot replied, his voice suddenly firm. It is resolving. He handed the cameo back to Daphne. Keep it safe. She stared at him. You are not taking it? Not yet. When she had gone, Japp rounded on him. What are you playing at? Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet certainty. The final act, he said softly. Tonight, Inspector, we gather them all, and the one who believed a single glance would suffice will discover that it was I who saw most clearly. By 9 o'clock that evening, the household had drawn inward upon itself like a clenched fist. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, and the wind moved restlessly through the bare branches outside. Lamps had been lit in the drawing room, their mellow light casting long, uncertain shadows across the carpet. At Poirot's request, all members of the household were assembled. Even the servants stood discreetly near the walls, pale and watchful. Inspector Japp positioned himself by the fireplace, solid and official. I took a place slightly behind Poirot, as I had so often done, conscious that the room seemed to revolve about his small, immaculate figure. He stood upon the hearthrug, hands lightly clasped before him. Mesdames et messieurs, he began gently, we are met because Sir Alistair Frobisher is dead. His death, though attributed to the heart, was not natural in the true sense. It was induced by design. A murmur ran through the room. Lady Frobisher's gloved hands tightened. Gerald's jaw hardened. Larkin's forehead gleamed faintly. Poirot continued, unhurried. This morning Sir Alistair received a letter. That letter questioned the authenticity of his most prized possession. The Roman Medusa cameo. It implied examination, perhaps exposure. Gerald made a sharp movement. You can't prove that. I can prove, said Poirot mildly, that such a letter existed and was burned in the grate. Fragments remain. All eyes turned involuntarily toward the library door. Sir Alistair was shaken, Poirot went on. He summoned Mr. Larkin. Shortly thereafter,
He wrote to his solicitor, if anything should happen to me, you must... He anticipated scandal. Larkin swallowed visibly. Then, Poirot said softly, he sought confirmation. Whether by examining the strong room himself or by confronting another, he discovered that the Medusa was gone. A gasp escaped Daphne. "Yes," Poirot said. "Gone. Removed earlier that morning." Gerald's face flushed. "This is nonsense. The strong room was empty when we opened it." "Empty," Poirot agreed, "but not necessarily empty at 11:30. He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping the room. Only one piece needed to be removed to create the shock. The rest were taken later to establish the appearance of theft. Inspector Japp nodded grimly. Sir Alister, believing himself deceived, perhaps defrauded, suffered a fatal seizure. He did not die of surprise alone,
but of humiliation. A heavy silence followed. "And the locked door?" Lady Frobisher demanded, her composure cracking. "A simple manipulation," Poirot replied. A cord passed through the keyhole after the visitor departed, the bolt drawn from outside to suggest solitude. Japp shifted, clearly satisfied to hear his own suspicions confirmed. Poirot's voice lowered. "The question, then, is not who possessed strength to kill, but who possessed knowledge." He turned abruptly toward Larkin. "Mr. Larkin, you were aware of Sir Alister's fears. You wrote of irregularities before the body was found. You stood at the window shortly before noon." Larkin's lips trembled. I was concerned only with the insurance." "Yes," Poirot said gently. "Concerned enough to notice that one cameo was missing." A faint cry escaped the secretary. You discovered the Medusa gone?" Poirot continued. "You realized what it meant. You also realized that Sir Alister's pride could not withstand exposure." "I did nothing," Larkin burst out. "No?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then who had the opportunity to remove a single piece quietly? Who had the key? Who knew the catalogue intimately?" Larkin sagged slightly, then straightened with sudden desperation. "You have no proof." Poirot inclined his head. "On the contrary." He extended his hand toward Daphne. "Mademoiselle, the cameo you found, may I?" She stepped forward and placed it in his palm. He held it up for all to see. This was hidden clumsily beneath a cushion, not to conceal it permanently, but to suggest panic. Yet its grooves were clean, recently handled. He turned the piece over, then looked directly at Larkin. "You replaced this one." Did you not? After removing it first." Larkin's face had gone ashen. "You removed the Medusa early this morning," Poirot said calmly. "You intended to confront Sir Alister with its supposed absence, perhaps to pressure him, to force a confession of fraud before the scandal broke. But you misjudged his strength." "I never meant," Larkin began hoarsely. "You meant only to frighten?" Poirot finished softly. "You did not anticipate death." The secretary's shoulders collapsed. "He ruined me," he whispered. "He knew the Medusa was questionable. He insured it as genuine. I warned him. He ignored me. When the dealer threatened exposure, I panicked. I took it, just for a few hours, to force him to face it." "And when he died?" Japp demanded. I was terrified. I returned to the strong room and took the rest. I thought it would look like robbery."
Or no one would question authenticity if everything was gone. "And the bolt?" Poirot asked quietly. "I closed it with a wire from my desk," Larkin murmured. "I meant only to buy time." The room seemed to exhale as one. Lady Frobisher sank into her chair. Gerald stared at Larkin with mingled fury and disbelief. Daphne pressed a hand to her mouth. Inspector Japp stepped forward, his expression firm. "That'll do, Larkin." As the constable approached, Larkin lifted his head, despair etched upon his features. "I never touched him," he said faintly. "I swear it." "I know," Poirot replied gently. "You struck no blow. but you wielded fear. Larkin was led away, his steps unsteady. A long silence followed. Rain beat more heavily against the windows as though emphasizing the finality of what had occurred. Lady Frobisher spoke at last.
So it was pride that killed him. Pride? Poirot said softly. And the terror of disgrace. He looked around the room once more, his gaze lingering briefly on each face. A single glance, he murmured, can reveal truth or destroy illusion. Sir Alistair saw in that glance not merely absence, but the collapse of his carefully constructed certainty. Inspector Japp drew a long breath. Well, Poirot, I'll admit, you saw it before any of us. Poirot inclined his head modestly. It was not difficult. One has only to observe the small things, the misplaced bolt, the hurried fire, the trembling hand. He adjusted his cuffs with habitual precision. The rest, he added quietly, is human nature. For a long moment after Larkin had been led from the room, no one spoke.
And the tension that had held Bramblehurst House in its grip all day seemed to loosen, yet it did not entirely dissipate. Something quieter, more reflective, settled in its place. Inspector Japp cleared his throat and moved toward the door. "We'll have a thorough search for the rest of the collection," he said briskly. "If what Larkin claims is true, they're still somewhere on the premises." "They are," said Poirot calmly. He had neither the time nor the composure to remove them from the house. They will be discovered in due course, likely in some compartment he believed ingenious. Japp gave him a sideways look. "You're not coming to supervise?" Poirot smiled faintly. "No, my work here is complete." When the inspector had gone, the remaining members of the household lingered in uneasy stillness. And Gerald paced once across the carpet and stopped before the fireplace. "So that's it," he muttered. "A misunderstanding, a damned scare." Poirot regarded him gently. "It was more than a misunderstanding, monsieur. It was a culmination." Gerald frowned. "What do you mean?" "Your stepfather lived by appearances," Poirot replied. "His collection, his reputation for discernment, these were not mere hobbies. They were foundations of his identity. When the authenticity of the Medusa was questioned, it struck at the very core of that identity." Lady Frobisher's voice was low. "He told me once that he trusted his eye above all else." "Yes," said Poirot softly. "And when that eye seemed to have failed him." She closed her eyes briefly. "He could not bear it." Daphne rose and crossed to the window, gazing out into the rain-darkened garden. "Oh, and Larkin?" she asked quietly. "Will he be charged with murder?" Inspector Japp, who had paused just outside the doorway and now re-entered, answered gravely. "That'll be for the courts to decide, but inducing fear in a man known to have a weak heart, then staging the scene to conceal it, it won't go lightly." Poirot inclined his head. "The law concerns itself with action, but conscience concerns itself with intention." Miss March, who had remained silent until now, studied him thoughtfully. "And what do you believe his intention was?" "To expose," Poirot said. "Not to kill." Gerald let out a harsh breath. "Expose what?" Poirot's gaze drifted briefly toward the library. "It is possible," he said carefully, "that Sir Alistair knew more about the Medusa's questionable provenance than he admitted. Perhaps he convinced himself of its authenticity. Perhaps he preferred illusion." Lady Frobisher stiffened, but she did not protest. "Human beings," Poirot continued gently, "are adept at believing what preserves their pride. When Larkin removed the cameo to force a reckoning, he underestimated the fragility of the structure he attacked." There was a long silence. At last Lady Frobisher spoke. "Monsieur Poirot, You said earlier that a single glance can destroy illusion. Yes. She looked toward the closed library door. Then perhaps it is better that he did not live to endure the rest. Poirot regarded her steadily. Perhaps, he said softly. The search for the remaining cameos extended late into the night. As Poirot had predicted, they were discovered in a locked dispatch case hidden behind false panelling in Larkin's office. Oid the Medusa itself lay wrapped separately in a drawer, its carved face serene and enigmatic, as though amused by the havoc it had wrought. When all formalities had been concluded and statements taken, Japp prepared to depart. The rain had ceased, leaving the air sharp and clean. "You'll be heading back to London?" he asked. "Immediately," Poirot replied. "I have had sufficient of country dampness." Japp gave a short laugh. "Well, Poirot, I'll say this. You saw it from the start, that envelope in your flat." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, yes, the smudge near the corner." "What about it?" I asked, surprised. "It was from ash," Poirot said lightly. "A faint trace, not from the library grate, but from another fire, more recent. It suggested that a letter had already been burned before the one addressed to the solicitor was written." "Aye, the sequence was wrong." Japp shook his head in admiration. "You and your little grey cells." Poirot inclined his head modestly. "They are tidy. They do not like disorder." As we stepped outside, the gravel crunched beneath our feet. The windows of Bramblehurst glowed softly behind us, no longer oppressive, but subdued. In the motor car bound for the station, I glanced at Poirot. He sat upright, immaculate despite the long day, his hands folded neatly upon his cane. "You knew very early, didn't you?" I said. "I suspected," he corrected gently. "Knowledge must be earned." "And it was the psychological element that convinced you?" "Always," he replied. "The physical facts are obedient servants. But the mind, that is the true architect." I considered this in silence as the dark countryside slipped past. "At heart," I ventured.
"Oh, it was vanity that killed Sir Alistair." Poirot's expression grew reflective. "Vanity, pride, fear of exposure, these are powerful forces, more powerful than poison sometimes." "And Larkin?" "He will have much time to reflect," Poirot said quietly. "He sought justice in his own fashion, but he chose the weapon of humiliation." The train carried us steadily toward London. Lamps flickered in distant farmhouses. The sky had cleared, revealing a scatter of cold stars. After a time, Poirot spoke again. "Hastings, you recall the violets upon my mantle?" "Yes," I said, startled by the sudden shift. "They leaned the wrong way," he murmured. "A small disorder. Yet it told me that something had been touched." So too at Bramblehurst. A bolt slightly misused, a blotter impressed too deeply, a fire insufficiently thorough. He turned to me with a faint, satisfied smile. "One must look, only once, if one looks correctly." "And what did you see, Poirot?" He adjusted his gloves with exquisite care. "I saw," he said softly, "that truth, like a cameo, reveals itself in relief, if one but casts the proper light." With that, he leaned back, eyes closed, as though the matter were as neatly concluded as the alignment of objects upon his mantelpiece. And I, watching the quiet confidence upon his face, reflected that no illusion, however artfully carved, could withstand the scrutiny of Hercule Poirot's single, penetrating glance. The following morning dawned clear and brittle, as though the storm of the previous day had been nothing more than an unpleasant interlude in an otherwise orderly world.
Yet Bramblehurst House bore the quiet exhaustion of a place that had witnessed truth forced into the open. Inspector Japp had remained overnight to conclude the formalities. By the time Poirot and I descended for breakfast, The news had settled upon the household like a fine, irrevocable dust. Mr. Larkin had been taken into custody. The remaining cameos, including the Roman Medusa, had been inventoried and sealed. Statements had been signed, but the emotional reckoning had only just begun. Lady Frobisher received us in the morning room. In the clear daylight she appeared older, though curiously steadier. "I wished to thank you before you left, Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly. "You are most gracious, madame." "There are matters," she continued, choosing her words with care, "which will not reach the newspapers." Inspector Japp, who stood near the window, responded with practical assurance. "The official cause of death will remain heart failure. The rest will be summarized." She inclined her head, relief flickering briefly across her features. Gerald entered then, less defiant than the evening before. "I suppose," he said awkwardly, "that this means the collection will be examined properly now." "It must," Lady Frobisher replied firmly, "whatever the truth may be." Poirot observed them both with mild interest. "Truth, monsieur, is rarely the enemy. It is the concealment that corrodes." Gerald's gaze dropped. "I never suspected—" "No," Poirot said gently. "You suspected other things." A faint flush crept up the young man's neck. Pride, I realized, had not been confined to Sir Alistair alone. Daphne joined us shortly thereafter. She carried a small velvet case and approached Poirot with quiet resolve. "This belongs to you for a moment," she said. He opened the case. Inside lay the Medusa cameo, its carved features serene and inscrutable. "You wish me to admire it?" he asked softly. "I wish you to tell me," she said, "whether it is genuine." Poirot studied the piece under the light from the window. His eyes did not merely look, they measured, compared, remembered. "At first glance," he said at last, "it is masterful. The carving is delicate, the proportions harmonious, yet the patina is inconsistent. There is a subtle overconfidence in the line of the serpents." Inspector Japp raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Poirot replied calmly, "that it is almost certainly a later copy, executed by a skilled hand, but not ancient." Lady Frobisher closed her eyes briefly. "So the letter spoke truth," Daphne whispered. "It spoke possibility," Poirot corrected. "Sir Alistair chose to see certainty." Gerald exhaled slowly. "And that certainty killed him." "Not the certainty," Poirot said. "The humiliation attached to it." He closed the velvet case and returned it. "A man may survive financial loss. He may survive illness. But if he has built his life upon the infallibility of his judgment, and that judgment is publicly questioned, he may not survive the blow to his self-conception." Lady Frobisher's composure wavered, but she did not weep. "He would never have admitted error." "No," Poirot agreed gently. "And thus error mastered him." Inspector Japp cleared his throat. "Larkin's statement's been recorded, and he claims he meant only to force Sir Alistair to confront the truth before the dealer exposed it. Says he believed a private shock preferable to a public scandal. And so he manufactured a private catastrophe," Poirot said softly. "Will that matter?" Daphne asked. "In court?" Japp's expression was pragmatic. "It will be argued, but he tampered with evidence, staged the scene, and knowingly frightened a man with a weak heart. The law doesn't favor experiments in psychology." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "The law must draw lines. Morality is less precise." There was a pause. Outside, the sun glinted upon the wet gravel, transforming yesterday's gloom into something almost bright. Gerald spoke again, more quietly. "You said yesterday that you solved it with a single glance." Poirot's moustaches twitched faintly. "Ah,
And that was perhaps dramatic. But you did, Gerald insisted. Didn't you, when Japp showed you the envelope? Yes, Poirot admitted. The smudge of ash upon its edge told me that a prior letter had been burned in haste. A man does not burn correspondence unless it troubles him deeply, and a troubled man writes to his solicitor. So you knew it wasn't robbery, I said. I knew it was not simple robbery, Poirot corrected. The removal of all 42 pieces was too complete, too theatrical. True thieves are selective or greedy. This was symbolic. And the bolt? Japp asked. Too neatly arranged, Poirot replied. When people seek to mislead, they often create perfection. But perfection is unnatural. Lady Frobisher regarded him steadily. Then my husband died not of crime, but of character. Poirot met her gaze without flinching.
Character shapes destiny, madame, sometimes fatally. There was nothing more to say. When at last we took our leave, the household seemed smaller, quieter, stripped not only of a collection, but of illusion. The motor car carried us once more down the gravel drive. The winter sunlight was sharp, almost unforgiving. As we approached the station, I turned to Poirot. It was pride, then, pride above all. Yes, he said thoughtfully, but also fear, the fear of being seen as fallible. And you? I asked lightly. Do you not fear that? Poirot regarded me with a twinkle. Mon ami, I am fallible in many things, but in observation. He placed a hand upon his chest with gentle emphasis. I strive for order. The train began to move, the countryside slipping backward in calm retreat. Remember this, Hastings, he added softly.
A single glance may deceive if guided by vanity, but a single glance guided by reason can illuminate all. He settled back into his seat, perfectly composed, as though the entire affair had been nothing more than a minor irregularity corrected in due course. And thus the matter of Bramblehurst was concluded, not by force, nor by spectacle, but by the quiet arrangement of facts within the disciplined mind of Hercule Poirot, who needed only to look once, truly, to see what others had overlooked.